Bien, on a fait un très beau tour du monde avec François Soulage. On voit à quel point toutes nos postures ont besoin d'être centrées sur le sens qu'elles ont. Aujourd'hui, et en tout cas maintenant, on va faire un tour du village avec Geneviève Bellil, ma chère Geneviève. On attend de bons souvenirs de travail d'équipe ensemble. Geneviève et moi travaillons régulièrement entre le Québec et la France pour essayer de faire grandir nos postures éducatives. Voilà, donc c'est une grande chance de pouvoir te donner la parole. Donc Geneviève est la directrice générale de l'Association québécoise des centres de la petite enfance. Et je vais laisser Geneviève vous présenter la session « Tout un village pour élever un enfant ».
Merci Nathalie. Merci pour la qualité de votre écoute. Vous êtes un public vraiment très attentif. On en parlait avec Madame Dockett. Donc, merci, bravo à vous. On a entendu parler depuis ce matin de l'importance d'être respectueux des besoins de l'enfant et de son développement. On entame donc dans cette dernière session-là la façon qu'on aura en collectivité d'accompagner l'enfant au cours de son parcours en petite enfance vers le monde scolaire. Et je crois que ça appelle à autant de respect dans ce travail-là de partenariat avec la famille, partenariat entre les lieux d'accueil. Donc, sans plus tarder, je vous présente la personne qui sera responsable de nous donner un coup d'envoi et par la suite, je vous donnerai les consignes pour les ateliers avant le souper. Donc, on accueille Madame Sue Dockett. Madame Dockett est professeure en éducation de la petite enfance au Charles Stewart University. Mon anglais, avec mon accent français, c'est difficile, je m'en excuse. Donc, elle effectue depuis plus de 20 ans des recherches sur la transition éducative, en particulier la transition vers l'école. On sait l'importance de cette première transition, ainsi que sur les attentes et les expériences et les perceptions de toute personne concernée. Cette recherche a fait l'objet de nombreuses publications et a eu un impact considérable sur les politiques, les pratiques et les recherches. J'ai hâte de l'entendre. Je suis sûre que c'est la même chose pour vous. Donc, je l'invite à prendre la parole.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thank you all for staying so late in the day. I hope my Australian English is going to be comprehensible because my French is not. Okay, I'd like to talk to you about some of the research that I've been doing with colleagues about transition to school over the last 20 or so years. And I particularly want to talk to you about the importance of collaboration. Is this the control? Great. So I want to talk about collaboration, and I want to talk about collaboration at lots of different levels as we think about transition to school. In much of the work that we've been doing over many years, we've talked about transition as processes of both continuity and change for all involved, not just for children, but for families, for educators, for education systems, and for communities. Very often when we talk about transition, we talk about the changes that are likely to occur. Sometimes we talk about the drastic changes that might occur for children or for families. But we also think it's important to remember that there's continuity. Children remain members of the same families. Often they remain members of the same communities. Often they retain continuity in relationships. Sometimes their friends go with them to the same school. So while we think of transition as a time of change, it's also important to think of transition as a time of continuity. And that helps us refocus a little bit too. Instead of just focusing on what's happening for children or how we might make children into the school students we'd like them to be, it helps us think about the other things that are happening and the changes for other people as well. We know very much that what happens in transition for children and all those others involved is very much influenced by a range of communities and contexts, and in particular the relationships, the identities, the agency and the power of all involved. The illustration on this slide comes from some work a few years ago where a group of international colleagues and I were involved in developing a position statement about transition to school. And that was a serious attempt to change the language about transition. Instead of just focusing on the readiness of children, it was an attempt to say there are other people involved in transition and starting school is about more than what children can do. It's about thinking of opportunities, aspirations, expectations and entitlements as children start school. We can think of the transition as a time of great challenge, or we can think of it as a time of great opportunity, a chance to review and revise what we think is important for young children and for communities and for education. I want to talk about collaboration particularly because transition can be a great time of collaboration for children, for families, communities, educators and professionals. But to build collaboration, we've got a fair way to go to build relational trust. In one of the slides this morning, we were reminded of the disparities that often exist between educators working in early childhood settings and educators working in schools. And I think one of the ways that we can promote serious collaboration is to look at some of those disparities. For example, I think the example was that there's not necessarily equal pay or equal working hours. If we're going to be serious about collaboration, we need to recognise the barriers, but also recognise there are ways to overcome them if we can work together. Building relational trust is incredibly important. If we can have collaboration where we listen to each other, we share difficult issues, we build a really positive climate, we expect to be able to engage productively, and where we trust each other, just about anything is possible. Our work has reiterated the importance of relationships and the ways in which strong relationships can build effective transitions and help build continuity across and between different contexts. We know that when strong relationships exist between those at school, in prior to school settings and communities, that each of those settings is regarded as a valuable resource. And we think not of education just happening in school, but we think of the resources for education that come from communities and from early childhood services as well as families. Our work has also reiterated the importance of relationships as key mediators of children's competencies. When you're engaged in a positive relationship, it's much easier to demonstrate your capabilities than if you're engaged in a situation where you're fearful or afraid or not quite sure what's going to happen. We know that relationships are important and that they provide resources for children and families as they enter new and different contexts, and particularly as children at school experience new expectations as well as new experiences. When we think about continuity, we're invited to think about a number of different things. So who is involved in the transition to school? What strengths do they bring to the transition process? It's often easier to think of the deficits or the problems that people might bring to the process, but we have to have a belief as educators that everybody brings some sort of strength. If we can identify that strength and build on it, then we're off to a good start in building strong relationships. It's also important for us to ask how those different people who are involved in transition define effective transitions. What is it that people are seeking when they're trying to promote a good or a positive transition? Is it a smooth transition, a seamless transition? Is it one where there are bumps but we help to work together to smooth them out? What do we mean by an effective transition? And we also need to ask, what are the roles of schools and communities in promoting effective transitions? Our work has reiterated the view that it's not just schools that are responsible for transitions, it's all of us in all sorts of different ways. When we work together, we can promote continuity and we can look at the changes and work out how to best manage those for all involved. But looking at continuity presents all sorts of challenges as well, because there are many different forms of continuity, many different ways of looking at continuity. And again, sometimes we don't unpack the language we use and what we mean by continuity. We know that we can look at developmental continuity, we can focus on individual children, building on their strengths, building on their learning experiences. We can look at developing transitions that reflect those individual differences, and maybe that's what some of us mean. In other conversations, we might be talking about philosophical continuity. Why can't school and preschool be more alike? Why do we have the differences we have? Why do our curriculum look so different? So we can talk about philosophical continuity. We can talk about curriculum continuity. Do we want the same thing? Do we want the curriculum from school to be extended into preschool? Would we rather see the preschool curriculum extended into school? But what do we mean? We can look at physical continuity. In Australia, early childhood settings tend to be rather small and self-contained. Some of our schools can be huge. What does it mean to change our physical context, and how does that influence our interactions? We can also look at organisational continuity. How is the day organised? In some of my recent conversations with children, they've been particularly concerned that they won't be able to eat at any time they want when they go to school. How do we organise the day? And is there discontinuity and continuity in that we can consider? In Australia, we've had various goes at administrative continuity by having early childhood and school services within the one federal department, sometimes apart, sometimes together. We can have administrative continuity where we have the same organisation responsible for different forms of education, but if that happens in name only, then perhaps we've not achieved what we've been looking for. So when we talk about continuity, what do we actually mean? And what conversations are we having to ensure that we're perhaps using the same terms to refer to the same things? I'd like to share with you some examples of some collaborations that come from a recent project across Australia where the aim was to look at supporting continuity of children's learning. And there were many instances of collaboration that were identified across the country as educators, families, children, communities sought to come together to work to promote a positive transition. I think I can see on the slide that the web address for this document is there. It's available for you to have a look at if you'd like to go into it in some more detail. But the aim was to look at supporting children, families, communities and educators, to recognise transition as times of both continuity and change for all involved, and to focus on transitions as a time of relationship building. Some examples. I think sometimes when we talk about collaboration, we forget about the importance of collaborating with children. We assume sometimes that transition happens to children, and instead we know that children are active participants in their own transition, and they exert or can exert considerable agency, both in supporting themselves and others as they work together. This was an activity that was introduced in a preschool in a rural area where the educators had realised that the children were going to far too many different schools for them to be able to form solid relationships with different schools. There may have been up to 20 different schools where children would be moving. And instead of trying to do nothing, as might have been easier, they decided to have a running diary, a book that they encouraged children to share their experiences in, to share their visits to school, to have their parents reflect on their visits, to have educators reflect on their visits. And so to have a book where children contributed their views, asked their questions, and sometimes sought answers. And this was a way where the children were not only able to support themselves, but the educators were also able to support both the parents and the children as they read and reviewed the material. So that All About School book became an incredibly precious possession for the children to share their experiences and to collaborate with each other. We had a number of instances too where schools and early childhood services worked particularly hard to collaborate with parents. In this example that came from a school, the educator explained that their philosophy was that when they enrolled a child, they enrolled a family. As teachers, they said, we see our role as helping to grow a whole person, and that means working with the family. We don't say you have to take on the family's problems. What we say is that you have to access the resources and help them find the resources they need, and that makes your teaching job easier. We had many conversations that tried to incorporate a strengths-based approach to working with transition, and that was not to ignore the challenges that existed, but to have a deep down belief that with appropriate help and support and appropriate resources, all of those involved in transition could be helped to work towards positive outcomes. And that applied not just for children and families in advantaged circumstances, but for those living in situations that were less than ideal. And it was underpinned by a belief, as I said, that every family, every child, every community could bring something positive to transition. If we found it and could build on it, then we were supporting that strength in many different ways. This is an example of a collaboration with community that's been going on for over 10 years. In one local community, the council, the Early Childhood Services, have an annual celebration. They invite every child and their family in the community, or every child who's starting school and their family, to come to a picnic in a local park, and they celebrate the idea that this is going to be a change in the child and the family's life as they start school. It's a picnic that's supported by local resources, local community resources. The children get to participate in a whole range of activities. They even get to meet some of the children who'll be going to their new school. And importantly, parents get to meet other families whose children will be attending the same school. This has become such a big production that this community has its own mascot, its own figure that goes to visit schools and help children talk about the issues that concern or interest them. It has community services that contribute to providing backpacks and hats and all sorts of things. They even have their own song, and they have a band playing in the park to celebrate starting school. There's a lot of things that go on, but the message underneath it is that children in this community are important, and it's important to celebrate a major milestone in their lives. By providing information and resources for families, it's also saying this is an important time for families, and we can recognise and support you in that role in a whole range of different ways. Perhaps the most challenging collaboration happens or can happen between professionals working in the different contexts. In Australia, there's often a gap between those working in early childhood services and those working in schools. And in some of the locations in which we worked, there were serious attempts to form professional networks where people could meet on a regular basis, share concerns, sometimes build a common language for talking about transition, as well as access to common resources. I have a few minutes, so bear with me and I'll just read a couple of these things to you. In the first example there's an example of a group that was formed by an early childhood educator who aimed to strengthen connections and communication between her service and the local school. The group was made up of the first year of school teacher and early childhood teachers, and they met regularly, usually face-to-face, but sometimes on Skype. And they discussed things like intentionality. What does it mean to teach intentionally? What multiple voices might we experience in the transition to school? What does it mean to be responsive? What do we mean by well-being in early childhood services, and how does that work across the transition to school? I was particularly keen to see that they also discussed pedagogy and play, and that the teachers in the school were open to conversations about how play might have a place in school curriculum, and they talked about professional learning. On the other side is an example of a much more organised and formal network in a community where over 40 professionals from a whole range of different services and government departments come together on a regular basis to talk about what's happening in their community and how at a policy level in that community they can work to support transition. They meet as a network once a term to compile and share information, to talk about data, to interpret it for their local community and to plan accordingly. Their achievements to date include introducing programs for health screening days for children, establishing a playgroup for children who don't attend organised early childhood services, and collaborative information that's been shared with their community. I share these examples with you to say that collaboration is possible in a whole range of different ways around the transition to school. We all benefit from collaboration when we involve children and families and other educators and communities. And there's no one way that will work in every different setting, but if we're committed to collaboration, we find that working towards positive transitions for all is really, really possible. It doesn't mean there are no challenges, but it means that as a team, as a collaboration, we have much more potential to work towards positive outcomes than if we try and do all of those things on our own. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai retenu 3 idées principales. Malheureusement, on n'a pas l'opportunité d'avoir une période de questions, mais je crois que vous aurez l'opportunité d'adresser vos questions à Mme Dockett. Mais je vous remercie pour tous les différents types de complémentarité. Je pense que ça donne à réfléchir. Souvent, on va penser que la continuité éducative, c'est de bien parler de manière positive de l'autre, mais il y a bien des aspects, des aspérités. La reconnaissance de la communauté, souligner une forme de passage, de passation vers le monde scolaire qui m'apparaît aussi une idée fort intéressante, et toute cette idée des communautés de développement entre les professionnels. Souvent, on va faire du développement dans des silos, mais on ne pense pas à décloisonner ces silos-là et à permettre aux professionnels de se rencontrer. Je vous donne quelques petites informations. Donc, vous êtes attendus pour le repas à 18h30. Ça se passera dans le présent bâtiment, dans le salon du parc. Si ma mémoire est bonne, c'est au 2e étage que ce salon est là. Mais de toute façon, l'équipe de Ensemble pour l'éducation sera là pour nous donner les indications.